Have you ever stopped to reflect on why some fictional characters transcend generations and remain alive in the collective imagination, even decades after their creation? There is something beyond fantasy, something deeper that resonates with human experience at its most fundamental level. And when we talk about the Dark Knight, we are not just facing a masked vigilante who fights crime in the shadows of Gotham City. We are facing a living symbol of Stoic philosophy applied to real life, an example of how ancient principles can be translated into concrete habits that transform anyone's existence. Batman is not just a comic book character, he represents a way of living with purpose and discipline, facing life's adversities with the same serenity that Marcus Aurelius preached in his meditations, or that Seneca defended in his letters. And today you will discover exactly how to apply Batman's 10 Stoic habits to transform your own journey, developing an unshakable mind and a life guided by solid values, even amidst the chaos of the modern world. What makes Batman so fascinating is not his wealth, his advanced technology, or his impressive physical abilities, but rather his capacity to transform pain into purpose, to convert trauma into discipline, to face the abyss without being consumed by it. When Bruce Wayne lost his parents on that fateful night in Crime Alley, he could have chosen various paths. He could have sunk into bitterness, into impulsive revenge, into alcohol or drugs, as so many do when facing devastating losses. But he did something different, something that Stoic philosophers would immediately recognize as the essence of their doctrine. He accepted that he could not change the past, acknowledged that absolute control over external events is an illusion, and channeled all his energy into what was within his power, his own transformation. This is the first and perhaps the most crucial of Batman's Stoic habits, the radical acceptance of what cannot be controlled and the absolute focus on what is under his domain. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we have power over our minds, not over external events, and that when we realize this, we find true strength. Batman lives this principle every day. He does not waste time lamenting what he cannot change, does not drown in self-pity, questioning why that happened to him. Instead, he takes full responsibility for his response to life's events, transforming personal tragedy into a collective mission. This habit of accepting fate without passive resignation, but with determined action, is what separates those who merely survive adversities from those who transcend them and emerge stronger. Batman's discipline is legendary, and this discipline does not arise from nowhere. It is built day by day through meticulously cultivated habits, and that is exactly what we will explore in this script. Each of the 10 Stoic habits that the Dark Knight embodies can be applied by you regardless of your current circumstances. You do not need to be a billionaire. You do not need access to cutting-edge technology. You do not need to have gone through a devastating tragedy to implement these principles in your life. What you need is the willingness to look within, to examine your own values, to question your priorities, and to have the courage to make concrete changes in the way you live each day. Stoics have always emphasized that philosophy is not an abstract academic exercise, but rather an art of living, a set of practical tools for navigating the challenges of human existence with dignity, purpose, and inner peace. And when we observe Batman through this philosophical lens, we realize that every choice he makes, every decision he takes, every sacrifice he makes is grounded in profound Stoic principles. He does not act on impulse, does not let himself be dominated by anger or fear, does not allow others' opinions to dictate his course of action. Instead, he cultivates what the Stoics called apatheia, not an absence of emotions, but rather the ability not to be controlled by them, to feel without being swept away, to recognize emotions as informative signals without allowing them to take command of his life. This emotional mastery is one of the central pillars of both Stoicism and Batman's persona, and it is something that can be developed through constant and deliberate practice. The modern world constantly bombards us with stimuli designed to trigger immediate emotional reactions. We live in a culture that values instant emotional expression, that celebrates impulsivity, that confuses authenticity with lack of filter. But the Stoics teach us something different. They show us that true freedom does not lie in expressing every emotion we feel, but rather in consciously choosing how to respond to life's events. And that is exactly what Batman does every night when he puts on his mask and takes to the streets of Gotham. He deliberately chooses who to be, how to act, what values to defend, regardless of external circumstances. This capacity for self-determination, to live according to internal principles rather than external pressures, is what defines a life of purpose and discipline. And it is what we will explore deeply in the 10 habits that make up this script. The second fundamental Stoic habit of Batman is constant training and methodical preparation to face any possible situation. The Stoics practice something called premeditatio malorum, the anticipatory visualization of adversities, not as an exercise in pessimism, but as a strategy for mental and emotional preparation. Epictetus taught his students to imagine the worst possible scenarios before they occurred, so that when and if they happened, the mind would already be prepared and not caught off guard. Batman takes this principle to an extraordinary level. He does not just imagine what could go wrong, he creates contingency plans for literally every conceivable situation, including scenarios in which his own allies turn against him. This level of preparation is not paranoia. It is Stoic discipline applied to its logical extreme, recognizing that life is unpredictable and that the best way to deal with uncertainty is not to deny it or fear it, but to be as prepared as humanly possible for any eventuality. In your own life, you can apply this habit through strategic planning, anticipating obstacles in your projects, preparing for difficult conversations, creating systems for financial security, and maintaining your physical and mental health as a constant priority. When you train your body regularly, you are not just seeking aesthetics. You are building physical resilience that will be your resource in times of crisis. When you study, learn new skills, expand your knowledge, you are not just accumulating information. You are sharpening the mental tools you will use to solve the inevitable problems that life will present. The third Stoic habit of Batman is absolute clarity about his values and an inflexible refusal to compromise them, no matter how convenient or advantageous it may be to do so. Batman's moral code is renowned. He does not kill, even when it would be easier, even when his enemies definitely deserve to die, even when keeping them alive results in more chaos and suffering for Gotham. This position may seem irrational to some, but for the Stoics it would make perfect sense because they understood that compromising one's fundamental principles, even if it results in immediate practical benefits, is to erode the very foundation upon which a virtuous life is built. Seneca wrote that the human soul must be like a rock against which the waves constantly break, but which remains firm and calms the fury of the sea around it. Batman is that rock. His values are unshakable, and it is precisely this firmness that gives him moral authority, that inspires others to rise, that transforms a vigilante into a symbol. In your life, identifying your core values and living consistently according to them is what builds integrity. It is what generates self-respect. It is what allows you to sleep in peace even when the world around you is in chaos. Many people live fragmented lives, acting one way at work, another with family, another still on social media, as if they were multiple disconnected personas. But the Stoics teach us that this fragmentation is a source of anxiety and suffering. An integrated life where your actions in all contexts reflect the same fundamental values is the path to the inner tranquility that the Stoics called ataraxia. The fourth habit is the daily practice of reflection and self-examination, something that both Batman and Stoic philosophers consider absolutely essential. Marcus Aurelius kept a personal journal, his famous Meditations, where he recorded his reflections, questioned his own actions, reminded himself of his principles, and prepared his mind for the challenges of the next day. Batman, in various versions of his story, keeps detailed records of your patrols, analyzes your mistakes, studies your enemies, and constantly evaluates whether you are fulfilling your mission effectively. This practice of systematic review is what allows for continuous growth, because without conscious reflection, we simply repeat the same patterns indefinitely, make the same mistakes, and remain trapped in the same limitations. Seneca recommended that at the end of each day, before going to sleep, you should review all your actions, asking yourself where you went wrong, where you acted well, and what you could have done better, not as an exercise in destructive self-criticism, but as a practice of constant improvement. When you implement this habit, you begin to notice patterns in your behavior that were previously invisible, identify emotional triggers that cause you to react in counterproductive ways, recognize areas where your discipline is failing, and can make adjustments before small slips turn into major deviations. The fifth Stoic habit that Batman exemplifies perfectly is the ability to act even in the presence of fear, not through the absence of fear, but despite it. Bruce Wayne chose the bat as his symbol precisely because bats terrified him as a child. He deliberately transformed his greatest fear into his greatest strength, a deeply Stoic psychological move. Stoic philosophers never preach the absence of fear. They recognize that fear is a natural and often useful response of the organism in the face of real threats. What they taught was that you do not need to obey fear. You can acknowledge it, observe it, appreciate the information it offers, and then consciously choose how to act. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action aligned with your values even when fear is present. How many opportunities have you missed because the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment paralyzed you before you even tried? Batman literally faces the worst imaginable threats every night, villains that defy all logic, situations where death is not only possible but likely, and yet he acts. Because he understood something fundamental that the Stoics have known for 2,000 years, that a life lived in an attempt to avoid all discomfort and all risk is not really a life. It is merely a slow surrender to fear. The sixth habit is the acceptance of impermanence and death as a natural component of existence, something the Stoics called memento mori, remember that you will die. Far from being morbid or depressing, this constant awareness of mortality is actually liberating, because when you truly internalize that your time is limited, that each day is precious and irretrievable, you stop wasting your existence on trivialities, unnecessary dramas, seeking external approval, accumulating possessions that bring no real meaning. Batman lives each night as if it could be his last, not because he is reckless, but because he recognizes the fundamental fragility of human life. He saw his parents ripped from existence in seconds. He viscerally understands that none of us have guarantees of tomorrow. This awareness does not paralyze him with existential terror. On the contrary, it energizes him to seize every available moment to fulfill his mission, to make a difference while he still can. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. When you live with this awareness, the things that once seemed terribly important, someone's opinion of you, the car you drive, how many followers you have on social media, suddenly reveal their true insignificance. You gain clarity about what really matters: meaningful relationships, genuine contributions to the well-being of others, continuous personal growth, living according to your deepest values. The seventh Stoic habit of Batman is the practice of temperance and self-control in all areas of life. Bruce Wayne has access to virtually unlimited resources. He could easily indulge in any imaginable excess, vices, luxuries, endless pleasures, but he does not. Not because he is an ascetic who rejects all pleasure, but because he understands that self-control is the foundation upon which all other virtues are built. The Stoics identified four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, and argued that temperance, mastery over one's desires and impulses, was fundamental to all the others. Without self-control, wisdom becomes mere theory without practical application, courage degenerates into recklessness, and justice is compromised by personal interests. Batman trains his body to human limits, but never uses substances that could compromise his mental clarity. He maintains relationships but does not allow them to become dependencies that compromise his mission. He experiences intense anger in the face of injustice, but channels that anger through discipline instead of allowing it to control him. In your life, cultivating this self-control means creating systems and habits that support your long-term goals instead of constantly yielding to immediate gratifications that sabotage your future. It means developing the ability to say no, not just to external temptations, but to your own impulses when they are not aligned with your values and greater goals. The eighth habit is the practice of justice and service to others as a central component of a purposeful life. The Stoics were not selfish individualists focused solely on their own inner tranquility. They understood that human beings are naturally social, and that part of living virtuously is contributing to the well-being of the community. Marcus Aurelius, who was the Emperor of Rome, saw his role as service to humanity, not as a privilege to be exploited for personal gain. Batman, despite being a vigilante operating outside the law, is driven by a deep sense of justice and a genuine desire to protect the innocent and make his city better. He could easily use his resources just to live comfortably, but he chooses to dedicate his entire life to serving something greater than himself. This commitment to a purpose that transcends immediate personal interests is what transforms an ordinary existence into an extraordinary life. You do not need to be a billionaire vigilante to apply this principle. You can ask yourself daily how your actions contribute to the well-being of others, how you can use your specific talents, your available resources, your unique position in the web of human relationships to make a positive difference. It can be something big or small. What matters is the intention to live not just for yourself, but as part of a larger community that you actively choose to contribute to. The ninth Stoic habit is adaptability and mental flexibility in the face of constantly changing circumstances. The Stoics were famous for their ability to adapt to any situation without losing their fundamental principles. They could be equally calm in wealth or poverty, in health or illness, in power or exile. Batman demonstrates this same adaptive flexibility. He faces completely different enemies that require radically distinct strategies, confronts situations that challenge all prior plans, and yet improvises effectively without panicking. This ability to remain functionally effective even when everything is going wrong is a crucial skill that can be developed through conscious practice. In your life, this means letting go of attachment to how things should be and working effectively with how they actually are. It means developing multiple competencies instead of relying on a single path. It means cultivating a growth mindset that sees obstacles as interesting problems to be solved rather than catastrophes that invalidate all efforts. The 10th and final Stoic habit of Batman that we will explore is maintaining a cosmic perspective that prevents you from getting lost in temporary dramas. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to visualize his life from the perspective of the stars, to imagine the entire human story as a brief moment in the infinite cosmic time. This exercise was not intended to make you feel insignificant and hopeless, but rather to free you from the tyranny of the ego and the trivial concerns that consume so much mental energy. Batman, standing on the rooftops of Gotham looking down at the city below, practices something similar. He sees the bigger picture, understands that his individual efforts are part of a much larger ongoing struggle that began before him and will continue after. This expanded perspective does not diminish the importance of his actions. On the contrary, it places them in a meaningful context. You can cultivate this perspective through contemplative practices, through the study of history that reveals recurring patterns in human experience, through connection with nature that reminds us of our smallness in the face of much greater forces. When you develop this mental zooming ability, to switch between intense focus on immediate details and an expanded perspective that contextualizes everything, you gain extraordinary psychological freedom. Failures lose their paralyzing power because you see them as temporary learning experiences in a much larger journey. Successes are appreciated without inflating the ego because you recognize all the factors beyond your control that contributed to them. These 10 habits. The Stoics of Batman are not inaccessible superpowers reserved for fictional characters. They are concrete practices that anyone can implement starting today. They require only a conscious decision to live with purpose and discipline, to stop being a passive victim of circumstances, and to take active responsibility for who you choose to be in the face of them. Start by choosing one or two of these habits to focus on initially. Implement them consistently until they become a natural part of how you operate in the world. Then gradually add the others. With time and practice, you will discover that you have developed an internal resilience and clarity of purpose that fundamentally transform your experience of being alive, not through dramatic external changes, but through the silent revolution of how you respond to everything life presents.